In the previous video, we actually created our first download data class, or rather the download XML method, as well as the do in background. So what I want to do is just finish off the download XML file method. Then we've got a few other little minor bits of housekeeping to do, and then we're actually ready to actually start testing a base version of this application. Firstly, one thing I didn't do in the download XML file method, I didn't add a final return statement. So I need to put return null right down there. This is after the catch statement, this component there. And you might be wondering, well, there's a return there. Why do we also need one there? Well, the reason is this return here only happens if the exception is not generated. In other words, if there isn't an error. If there is an error, what will happen is the code jumps down to here. It'll output that to our debug console so we can actually see it in logcat. And then we need to issue some code there, in this case to return null, which will tell us that there was an error downloading. And that actually relates to this code here. We're actually doing a test to see whether if mfile contents is null, then we're going to display another message as well. So that's what I need to do just to finish that off, is to make sure that return null is actually set up in there. So what we've done now is we've actually got two things set up. We've actually got our on do in background method done and our download XML file. So if you recall, do in background, that is the command that is sent off when we start the async task that actually does the processing. But what we now need, we need to override another method, and this one's going to be called on post execute. And the reason that we're going to override that, in this case, we're only going to actually just print out a message just to show you that it was actually working and to show that the result code. But this is what happens when we get a call back from Android to say the file has been successfully downloaded. In other words, automatically, once all this code is executed and is complete, it automatically calls this next method called onPostExecute. So I'm going to implement that now. So we're going to override that. I'm going to select on override methods. I'm going to choose onPostExecute. I'm going to leave that super in there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add one other line, log.d, download data. Again, the same name as I've used in other debugging log outputs. And we're just going to put error downloading. You'll see why when we start running this application. So again, what happens is after this is all completed, automatically this onPostExecute gets returned to us, and the string S, that's actually the result, has been received from the calling process. So what we could do, just to make it easier, we could actually put something like this. We could put result, it used to be result, and instead of putting error downloading, because we've already seen that above, we could put something like result was plus result. So I do recommend that you try and do this sometimes with these methods. Just output the log and dump out the result in this case, just to see the types of data that is coming back, and it can help you understand the whole process a little bit better when you're doing things like that. So certainly when I'm implementing classes for the first time, I do lots of log.ds, and it's really quite handy to actually have those, because these are automatically stripped out when you actually compile the code. When you actually compile the code and it goes ready to be uploaded to Google Play. So the code just won't be executed. So it just gets stripped out automatically. So it's handy to do these logs for that reason. So we're good to go now. So what we need to do now is go back to our main activity. So I'm just going to open up our project view again. Actually, I'll click on project. I don't think I had that selected before. So it's always a good idea to do that up here in the top left-hand corner. And just go into our source code again. Our main Java. And I'm just going to double click. Well, actually, I was in there anyway, wasn't I? I just had to scroll up. I was thinking it was in another class, but of course, I'm in the same class. So, of course, if we run this at the moment, nothing's going to happen. And the reason is we've specified the class, we've created the class, private class, and we've told it what to do in terms of downloading the data and what happens once it's finished and so on. But what we haven't done is call this code anywhere. So what we actually need to do is to add the code into our main activity that actually calls and creates a new instance of our download data class and actually calls it and actually starts processing it. So to do that, the good place to put that is right up here after the set content view. So we can put something like download data, we'll call it download data, equals new download data. And then we can put download data dot execute. And the dot execute needs these parameters which we talked about before. So the parameter that's actually in there now that we want to put in there is the URL for the RSS feed, which we talked about in the first video in this section. So to do that, we're going to go back to our browser and back to our RSS feeds app, or page I should say. I'm going to right click top 10, click on copy link address. So I've selected top 10 free apps. Back into our app again. And I'm going to put the link that I've just copied in double quotes and paste it in like so, as you can see on the screen. So we've created a new instance of the class called download data, which of course is this class down here. Next thing we've done is we've used the .execute. Now .execute again is part automatically of the async task, and its role is just to start the process off. So it's going to set, by setting that parameter internally, the async task will automatically call this do in background and then pass the parameter that we've passed here into that automatically and start the whole process of starting off this async task. So we can try running this now and see what happens. And I'll just check that I've got my emulator running and it's all ready to go, which it is. That's good. So if we run this, now we should actually get an error the first time we actually run this. And the reason why we get that will become apparent. Okay, so it's asking us for the emulator. I'm going to choose that one, click on OK. And we should actually get an error. I'll give it a second to update on the screen. And there we go. Now, you might be wondering, well, how did I know there was going to be an error? Well, I specifically left something out. And looking at all this code, this is actually a dump of program crash. And you can see it says fatal exception, async task 1. So that async task hash 1 means it's just a number that's internally generated by the Android code. So it's the only async task that we've actually got in our application, because obviously we've only had the one call up here in our onCreate method. But the bit I want you to look at is this error here, permission denied, missing internet permission. That's something we need to actually fix, but also have a look at this security exception. Now, what we can actually do is we can trap this error and actually add that to our code and make this look a little bit nicer instead of showing all this stack trace. And to do that, we can go back into our code. We can just scroll down. So we'll just close it off the screen for now, down the bottom, so we can see what we're doing. Now, you notice how we've got a catch IO exception. We could also catch that security exception. So we could do something like this. We could do catch. If you remember, it was security exception, which is that one on the screen there. We'll call that one E. Download data. So we're just adding another catch to this. If we run this again, now that I've added that code, we should get a different result. This time we shouldn't get that big stack trace with all those errors. We should just get our message. That's because we've trapped that error, so we've actually stopped the program from crashing. Because when you see that big dump that you saw previously, that was an indication that the program had actually crashed. And it's obviously not a good idea for that to happen. So what I want to show you now is this download data. So if you recall again, we use this same log description here everywhere. So what we can actually do is copy that, and I can actually paste that in here for under a filter. By pasting that in there, we're only going to be getting the error messages that relate to our program now. So to our application that we've actually created. So you can see here, firstly, the security exception needs permissions. And this is the actual error, permission denied, missing internet permissions. We've also got some other errors there. Result was null and error downloading. And result was null. So you can see that this was executed as well. The onPost execute was executed automatically. You'll find that we didn't actually add any code for that. It was actually created, as I said, automatically when the download was finished, or it actually crashed when it didn't successfully complete. It was executed automatically. And this code was obviously also executed as well because we've got that error downloading message on the screen. So that can be a handy way to actually break down and only see just your error messages, because if you leave that out, you get all this other mumbo jumbo, which may or may not be what you're looking for. And just to make things really complicated, if we do no filters, this is actually everything. And you'll find that when you're running an emulator or a real physical device, you get heaps of messages. You get all sorts of things, as you can see there, pages of it. So it can be a really handy idea, firstly, to make sure that you set to only show selected application, which is only our one application, and that application is the one that's showing here in this list. And that will be the package name that you've selected and then the name of the app. But then also you can break it down further to only include messages that have got a particular message description, ID, which was the one that's specified in there. Very handy to do that. But okay, bottom line is permission denied, missing internet permission. So we need to find out why we've got that and how to fix it. Well, this is the concept of permissions with Android applications. By default, your application hasn't really got any permissions to do anything at all, and you have to get approval of the user, of the person who's running your application, for that specific permission at runtime when you first actually run the application. So if you've got an Android device, I'm sure you've been familiar with when you went to install an application, when you went to Google Play, then you selected the application and you select installed, it came up with a pop-up and it showed you a typical number of application or particular permissions that it wanted. And you can see on the screen there, I'm actually showing you just a sample of a permission screen. So that comes up automatically by Android for all the permissions that you've specified that your application actually needs. So one thing you might think would be that it's a good idea to just have your program, your app, select all permissions and to ask the user for that. But that would really be a bad thing because the user would see that you're asking for all these permissions, some of that may or may not be appropriate. Probably a lot of them wouldn't be appropriate for your application and they may not download it as a result. In our case, the permission we need is to use the internet because by default, your application, unless the user gives the authority at that point, again, that screen, the little pop-up that comes up on the screen, as you can see there on the screen now, unless they approve that by accepting that, you're not going to be able to access the internet. So what we need to do is with our application, we need to define the permissions we actually need for our application. So in this case, the only permission we need is the internet, because obviously we need to access the internet so that we can download the RSS feed. So to do that, we need to open the Android manifest.xml file. I need to click on that, and you can see that it's just below the RES folder, Android Manifest. And it's got all this stuff in here, which we don't need to talk about yet. We'll be talking about that in later videos. What you do need to do is go down to the bottom where it's got the less than / application, greater than. And on the next line, type a less than and type users. And I'm scrolling down and selecting users permission. And you notice you've got all these permissions. Now, these are all the different types of permissions that your application can actually potentially ask for. Access Wi-Fi state, battery stats. There's literally hundreds of them. The one that we want is android.permission.internet. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to double click that. And I'm going to put a slash in there. It will automatically close that off. So what we've done is we've now asked, or defined, I should say, that we need the internet permission. Now this is case sensitive. Just to be clear, if you typed in something like permission, it will accept it, but that won't work. So it has to be typed exactly how you saw it there. And if you're in any doubt as to what it should be, you can just delete that out altogether and just start typing and then access the one from the drop down to make sure you've typed it in the right way. So we've now defined it, as I said, that we want internet permission. Now, when you're debugging your applications, when you're running them in Android Studio, you don't need to click on accept for those permissions. But once you deploy your application to Google Play, that's when they'll get that little pop-up that I showed you earlier for the type of permissions they want. So with that done, we've now defined our permissions. We can go back to our main activity. But the other thing I want to do now is I want to just scroll up here and I want to make a deliberate typo in the URL. Because now that we've added the security permission, that should not come up anymore, that error. But I want to show you what happens with an invalid URL. So I'm just going to put in a couple of extra characters in there, which we know will make it an invalid URL. And we'll try running it again and see what happens. Okay. This time we've got a different error. You can see we've got IO exception reading data, unable to resolve host, AEREX, iTunes.apple.com, no address. So this part here, this IO exception reading data, this is that error, extended error message that I actually pointed out earlier. So that relates to this IO exception reading data e.get message. If you want to get a stack trace, and that shows you the line numbers where it's crashed, what you can also do is do something like this. I recommend this can be really good for debugging. If you type e.print stack trace, and this E corresponds to the variable that you defined there. If we do that, we'll actually get a much longer stack trace, which gives us more information about the error and actually goes back and even shows you the line number where the error was. So I'm going to run that again and we'll see that error. Okay, so you can see now we've got some extra lines. We've got this W system error. So this is an error that's been sent out to the console automatically by Java, but it's actually saying, now it's giving you the line number, so it's actually saying, okay, well, I was in the download XML file, main activity, line 73. So we come up here, line 73, that's the error, that's where we actually got an error. But then it also comes back and says, oh, I was also in the do in background, that's where I called that from, which was on line 54. And you can see that was the line that was executed. So it really gives you, it does just what you think it does. It gives you a trace of the code that was executed. And it goes back again to line 48, which was what the actual class was actually created. So that can be handy to print out a stack trace if you want to find out more information about the specific line numbers to try and fix an error on a particular line. But I'm going to leave that commented out for now. I'll comment that out so we don't see that extra line of information. Okay, so now I've shown you the two errors. we'll go back and we'll fix the error here now so it actually comes up and hopefully will actually work. And we should be able to get a dump of the output showing in the console. So I'm going to run that again. Okay, this time you can see we've got some activity down in the bottom here. We've got all this stuff that looks a little bit like mumbo jumbo, but this is all the data from the XML file. And if we scroll back up and have a look, this time we got the response code was 200. 200, that actually means that it was successfully read. You don't really need to understand much more than that at this stage, but you get different codes when you're reading a web page. 200 indicates that it was successfully read. A 404 would mean that the file was not found. There's other errors as well, like a HTTP 500 would mean that there's an error with the server, so on and so forth. The bottom line was that that actually worked. Now here where it's got result was, well, this is now the entire XML file. Now one thing to remember is I'm going to select that, but you'll notice as I scroll down, it seems to cut off. Well, this is an error with Logcat. Logcat actually abbreviates the amount of data showing in a log. So even though it looks like we haven't retrieved right down to the bottom of the file, all the data has been downloaded at this stage. So we've actually got that, and that's all stored in our variable, but we're only seeing a little bit of it on the screen. So what we're going to do now is, now that we've proved that we can actually get this working and we see the data in the console, so now that we've done that, let's add the capability of showing it on the screen. So in other words, in the actual application itself, instead of showing hello world, we're actually going to put an error message if we can't see any data, no data. Otherwise, we're just going to put a dump of the XML file on the screen here now. And in a future video, we'll start prettying that up and making the data look a little bit nicer. But for now, just to finish off the video, let's do that and just dump it out. So the way we go about doing that is we go back to Android Studio. I'm going to close off this for now, the bottom, and we're going to create a new variable that we need, a text view. But before I do that, I'm going to go into my layouts folder under res, layout, activity_main.xml, wait till that renders. And just to be quicker, I'm going to go click on text, and we've already got a text view as you can see there. The only thing I need to do is I'm going to add an ID to that so that we can actually reference that in our code. I'm going to type Android ID equals @ plus ID. We're going to call it XML text view, like so. And so we'll be able to access that in our main activity. So I'm going to go back to main activity, and I'm going to create a variable, which you've seen me do this before. It's a text view, and we're going to call it XML text view. Next, before we call the download, we need to create an association. So I'm going to create one. I'm going to type XML text view equals, you've seen this before, text view, find view by ID, and capital R dot ID dot XML text view. So we've now associated the text view that's on our layout, on our screen, to the variable that we've actually got, the field that we've defined for this class. So now that we can access that directly, it's a relatively simple thing in the actual class itself to add the code so that we can actually show something on the screen. So looking at the code, where do you think we would actually do that? Well, we'd actually do it in the onPost execute. We wouldn't want to put it in here, because that's the code that's executed in the background. We wouldn't want to put it in the download XML file. We need to actually put it in the onPost execute, because for an async task, that is the right place to put code to update the user interface. You'll actually get errors if you try and update a user interface in another one of these methods. This code onPost execute is designed for you to be able to update or call a method if you've got some complex layout that you need to change. This is the place to put it. So all we really need to do there is to show this data on the screen, because we know that we've got the data now. The data is stored in a field called mfile contents. We literally just need to do XML text view dot set text mfile contents. And that should now set the contents of the XML that we've downloaded and show that on the screen. So why don't we run that just to make sure that it works. Little tab over. And there you go. You can saw that we briefly saw it said hello world. Then the message got updated with the contents of the file. And obviously, because I haven't implemented any sort of scrolling or anything like that, we can't see the rest of the XML file that sort of would be available as we actually scroll down. But this is the raw XML code directly from the download. So obviously we're retrieving the data successfully, and we've managed to update the screen to show that. So that's a very basic download mechanism that we've actually got working, but it's not particularly useful yet because it's not really showing us the data in a format that we want to see it in. It's still, of course, showing it in XML format. So in the following videos, we're going to change our application so that we can see that data and we're going to present it on the screen in a friendlier format. So I'll see you in that next video.